Vamos a empezar.
Okay, so we are going to start the third session of the World Conference on Bioethics. I would like to make an announcement. Those of you who need a certificate of attendance, could you please fill out the assessment? It is outside, where you have all the documents to fill out in paper, but also on the website you can also fill out the information to get your certificate. Students also have to sign attendance to the Congress, the university students, so that they can get the credits, the training credits. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Buenos días a todos. We are starting this roundtable with two speakers, Dr. Ewa Bartnik and Dr. Svitlana Pustovit. And we have a communication of 10 minutes by Gabriele Corneli, that is not here. I don't know if it's in the... Well, okay. There are two talks of 30 minutes. Please be sure you follow the time. And doctor, with me in the table is Dr. Devline Msowoya, okay, who will present the speakers. First of all, I would like to thank Svitlana, the presence here, because we know the situation in your country, and we are very grateful because you are here. No, but we are grateful you are here, okay, particularly because the situation of your country from Ukraine, and we show our solidarity with your population, with your people. So, Dr. Msowoya will present the two speakers, and then we are starting the talks.
Well, thank you very much, and once again, congratulations to Dr. Macero Paratias, Dr. Isorina, for this never-ending, inspiring presentations we have been having all these days. And without wasting much time, because we are always against time, we are going to start our presentation with Ewa Bartnik. She is the professor of genetics at the University of Warsaw. And her presentation is Humans 2.0, Hope or Threat. Thank you.
You prefer to be here, or?
No, we can be here.
It's okay here.
Yeah, it's okay here. We can be here.
I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. This has been a very interesting meeting. And I'm going to start with the Polish flag, as it was sadly missing from the 73 flags which were presented on the... No, it's just sort of to make me happy. I'm a geneticist specializing in mitochondrial diseases. I'm a biologist, and I've been engaged in various activities involved with bioethics, including the International Bioethics Committee, the Irish Scientific Committee, and, to put a long name short, the WHO Committee for CRISPR. So, I'm going to start with a sidetrack, which I cannot resist because my field is mitochondrial genetics, and it has nothing to do with CRISPR, but it has quite a lot to do with the modification of human genomes. It has been mentioned that mitochondrial replacement has been performed at least once in Mexico and at least once in Newcastle. Sorry, a child was born in Newcastle, not in Newcastle, but it was Newcastle scientist who was born in Great Britain last year who had a mitochondrial replacement. This appears always, sometimes, in some version around Mother's Day, because mitochondria come from the mother. But something which is mentioned much less commonly is the use of mitochondrial replacement not to how should I put it, to prevent passing diseased mitochondria from a mother to her children. It has been also used in at least 2 clinics that I know about, there may be more, to quote-unquote treat infertility for in vitro fertilization. The 2 clinics I know about is Nadia, which is in the Ukraine, and a combination of a Spanish and a Greek collaboration. The clinic is located in Greece. What I would like to point out is that what it says here, clinic with the first baby using a 3-parent technique to treat infertility, this is false. I mean, you have a 3-parent baby, but the reason that the treatment worked, we don't know. And this is also something for me which is a little shocking. The clinic offers selection of sex of the babies. This is forbidden in many countries except for reasons, well, if there is a genetic disease linked with the X chromosome, it is allowed, but it is not allowed to select children normally in quite a lot of places. The second clinic has published its work, and it was published last year, and essentially mitochondrial replacement was used for a number of couples who had problems with getting a child with quote-unquote traditional in vitro fertilization. It's interesting that it worked in only about 6 or 7 cases of the almost 30 transfers that they tried. And what is also interesting, though not in this case, it is not important because the mother's mitochondria were not defective, is that in one case, one of the children who were born had a very high percentage of his mother's mitochondria. If this were being done for a mitochondrial disease, this would have been quite a bad thing. So this is the end of the sort of mitochondrial sidetrack. Now I'm going to go back, well, a long time, to a paper, essentially, a paper which appeared in Science in '74, which makes it 50 years ago, which is quite incredible how long ago it was. And I remember these times very well because I was a graduate student at the time. And I just want to say a few words about genetic engineering as compared to CRISPR. In a funny way, we are using bacteria, and we are using bacterial defense systems. The ones that were used for genetic engineering were restriction enzymes. The ones that are used for CRISPR are the CRISPR-Cas or the analogs. However, both systems were used by bacteria for defense against bacterial viruses. So this paper appeared, everyone has heard about Asilomar, which took place in '75. Fewer people have heard about the Miles Symposium, which took place in Boston in '76, which was one of the very few attempts to get the public and the scientists to talk together. What I remember from that symposium, because I went into it as a very young postdoc, I came to MIT and the symposium was on the next day, was the fact that if you look back at it, all our fears, what genetic engineering could do, were unfounded. Essentially everything we know about human genes and genetics has been indirectly derived from genetic engineering. This paper, you know, and some of you co-authored it, and this appeared just 9 years ago, and it was mentioned here several times. What I would like to show is what that paper stated, because that paper initiated a round of incredible amounts of documents which were produced by various societies, sometimes together in a book, sometimes individually. I think probably every scientific bioethics group produced something. But this is what was said in the Baltimore paper: strongly discourage any attempts at germline modification, while societal, environmental, and ethical implications of such activity are discussed among scientific and governmental organizations. And this doesn't say anything about the public, but you have later create forums where scientists who are experts from scientific and bioethics community provide information and education, including the potential to treat human diseases. And such research is essential to inform deliberations about what clinical applications, if any, might in the future be deemed permissible. François Baylis mentioned the fact that at some point in time, we went from thinking whether it should at all be done to discussing conditions in which it should be done. And she also showed very nicely that these conditions are extremely rare. I mean, to have a homozygous person with Huntington's, it hardly ever happens. It does happen, but it's very rare. To have two people with cystic fibrosis, double mutations, to want to have a child, it's already problematic in the beginning. The men are in general infertile. So anyway, so I'm going to talk both about somatic and germline, but as I see germline, it's not on the scale of somatic changes that we can introduce. Simply, we have 7,000 or 8,000 rare diseases. I've never seen the final number because we really don't know. Some cases have been found once in the world. So is it a disease or is it a chance mutation? But altogether, there are many people who suffer from rare diseases. The problem with treating rare diseases, not only by various modern means, is that it's not really worthwhile for companies to develop something that can treat one person in a million. You may remember the story of Glybera, the first drug that was approved in Europe in 2012 for treating lipid metabolism deficiency. I think one person was finally treated and the drug is no longer available. I don't know whether it will become available in Canada. There's one part of Canada where the disease is much more common, so there were some hopes that perhaps it could be used there. But a rare disease is something which occurs less than in 1 in 2,000. However, there is one disease which is not rare, which is really rather a common disease, as you'll see from the next slide. And it has been mentioned here a number of times, namely sickle cell anemia. And for sickle cell anemia, over 500,000 of babies were born with sickle cell disease in 2021. This is just incredible. And there are very many people who are sickle cell disease trait carriers, so people who have one mutated genes. So it affects about 100,000 Americans. And one of the therapies, and this was also mentioned, which is used, is a CRISPR modification. What for me was extremely interesting, the WHO committee with a very long name, which I call the WHO CRISPR committee, had one of our last meeting before the pandemic at the end of February in Cape Town. And I know about rare diseases, I know about treatments, I know that things are expensive and so on, but we went to talk about CRISPR treatments, and what we found out was that essentially in most of the world, much cheaper treatments which are not as effective but do help, such as hydroxyurea, vaccinations, penicillin, and things like that, were not available. It was quite a shock to me because reading and sort of getting it firsthand is a different thing. The problem with the modern therapies, and this is not only CRISPR, this is also targeted drugs for spinal muscular atrophy, for the drugs that are used for cystic fibrosis, and many, many others. They're extremely expensive. Now, whether these prices have to be like that or not is a question that I cannot answer, but I'm going to go on a sidetrack about a somewhat different thing. I was talking to Hervé Schneiweiss yesterday, and some of you may remember the battle for the patent for BRCA1 and BRCA2 diagnosis, because in Europe the tests could be done for say $100, whereas Myriad was asking $2,000 and blocking any kind of efforts of other companies. Because of an extremely long court battle, at some point in time I stopped following it because it was these were winning, they were winning, and so on. In the end, Myriad did not win. So the price went down, and actually the mutations that were being looked for outside the patent that Myriad had there were more of them. In any case, I would like to show you the cover of a great effort initiated by Jennifer Doudna, who gathered 30 scientists and economy specialists and so on. And for a year, they discussed how to lower the costs of gene therapy. And they came up with several propositions concerning prices, organization and funding models, intellectual properties, and manufacturing. The problem is, the best they can hope for is to decrease the price tenfold. A tenfold decrease in price will still not allow most people to be treated. Standard treatments are cheaper, but they have to be given for the lifetime of the sick person. So how do you calculate the exact cost of gene therapy? I think no one really knows. There are all kinds of calculations that I have seen. Yes, the companies need to get some kind of refund of their investment. On the other hand, practically all these discoveries are based on very basic science, which was done by scientists for public funds. And one thing that is quite often mentioned is calculations relating to the quality of life. Only it's very difficult to sort of quantify feelings and things like that. Maybe it will be done at some point in time. The WHO framework, and I'm going to talk about social things, one of the things that was in it was social justice, so celebrating and promoting diversity. This is, again, a very difficult thing, because for some persons, the cure of a disease such as deafness could be treated as, I don't know, destroying their identity or affecting their identity. But what will we have for the future? Well, we have humans. What can we do to them? Well, we can treat them, but for most cases we can treat them when they're born. We don't have to go and treat the fetus, except in the situations that were very beautifully analyzed in the various things that analyzed CRISPR ethics. And as was said before, it will not be a very common thing. Currently, the things that are working for CRISPR are sickle cell anemia, various things that modify cells. One of the extremely sort of side effects that are not exactly directly related to changing humans is, you may have heard that there were 2 heart transplantations and a kidney transplantation of patients who received pig organs, but the pigs had been extensively modified by CRISPR, removal of viruses, changes of, well, pig genomes. So this also is a CRISPR thing. This will probably continue because we are still missing transplantation organs. It's not always easy to say what is an enhancement, because it's not my example, but if you treat a patient with a muscular disease and get him to the point of normal, whatever that is, that would be treatment. If you go 5% more, it would be enhancement. So you have a sort of gray zone. And the other thing, if you would do a CCR5 deletion properly, not like it was done on those Chinese girls, would that be enhancement? Probably it would be. One more thing that I have to say, I'll show later the cover of Françoise Bales' book on CRISPR. But one thing that is not really discussed, we talk about eyesight, intelligence, beauty, and whatnot. What we don't really talk about is whether we could modify humans for the good of the planet, so that we would consume less meat, or maybe be fit for life in space, or maybe something else. I'm a great fan of science fiction, so I hope something like that gets written at some point in time. But very seriously, what we are looking at are effects on individuals. We are not really thinking about effects on society. Various things have come out, and I don't think I want to talk about this, but I want to talk about this one. It's something that appeared on the cover of a totally non-scientific journal, a British weekly called The Economist, which actually has an extremely good science section, but this cartoon or picture, whatever it is, shows that even very good people for writing scientific reports don't quite understand what you could modify in a human being. And my impression is, I mean, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the general public. Most people come out of school believing a single gene affects a single trait. So we have genes for intelligence, genes for height, genes for skin color. Well, we don't. We have many, many genes for every one of these traits, and all the things that are shown here would not work for modification. We have really no idea how many genes it takes to make an elite athlete. Boldness is probably due to testosterone and some kind of interactions. I have no idea if anyone knows about perfect pitch. No idea how many genes are responsible for intelligence, and we should perhaps add that it's not just genes, it's environmental interactions and stimulations. Perfect eyesight, well, the problem is that we live like this and not like that, and we do not get enough sunlight as kids, so it's not genes. And as far as low risk of Alzheimer's, breast cancer, and strokes, there are monogenic forms of Alzheimer's and breast cancer, but most aren't. So, an example. All kinds of very interesting things have been produced, and they're all very interesting, and they all, in the end, say that sometime we should do it, let's just make sure it's safe. And this is from the Human Genome Editing Science, Ethics and Government. So absence of reasonable alternatives, editing genes that have been convincingly demonstrated to cause or strongly predispose to a serious disease or condition, and credible preclinical or clinical data on risk and potential health benefits. Probably, I mean, this is just theoretically and as a geneticist, if you could, without affecting anything else, change the Huntington's gene with its repeats, which cause Huntington's disease, to lose the repeats, it would probably not do anything else. However, Louis mentioned David Liu, who is fine-tuning CRISPR and CRISPR derivatives and all kinds of incredible enzyme systems. I think he'll get to the point where you can target a single nucleotide in a whole genome and get the C to A or G to T or whatever it is that you want. The problem is, what will be the cases that you can do it? And that still would not work for Huntington's, because for Huntington's you have to cut something out. So the questions that we have are, if we can do it, should we do it? If we can, is there any way for it to be affordable? And now I'm talking about somatic, not germline. Are we going to get two races of people? Those who have been genetically modified and those who haven't. I'll show some literature examples. And can we prevent discrimination? Because one of the very serious objections to germline editing is that if some diseases or variants of human genes become rare, will those people become discriminated against? And something that I found from the European Society of Human Genetics pertains to the social part. That is, how do we make sure that all voices are heard? How will those voices be considered and weighted in policy making? And how can we make sure that public education engagement is accessible to all? For me, that last one is a very serious problem. Social engagement can never encompass everybody, only the people who are interested. And the ones who are interested are very often of two kinds, those who are very strongly against and those who are very strongly for. Now, I would like to mention two books that were written by two of my colleagues from the WHO CRISPR committee. I'll start with the one on the right one, because Jamie Metzl is a futurologist, so this book presents a future that I would not really like to see. One of the possibilities is that every baby becomes gene edited because it's so easy to do, and why shouldn't you do it if you can? The book on the left has been shown previously by Françoise Baylis during her presentation, and it's a book which really shows you what is going on, explains all the problems in a very, very good way, and I think it's one of the few books which can be read by a professional and by a person who has no idea about anything, because it's of the way it is written. And my last slide is this one, because we always should give references to any kind of presentation. On the left side you have one of my favorite books by one of my favorite authors. We have a future where strangely enough, it's not individuals who are changed, it's groups who are changed. We have, of course, artificial wombs, because without that you cannot get anywhere. And we have, if I remember correctly, 5 categories of people, the alpha and all the further letters of the Greek alphabet, and they are increasingly adapted to more menial tasks. So alphas are intelligent and the other ones less and less so. We don't have artificial wombs yet, but as far as I know, for mice you can get halfway through a pregnancy already. And I think George Church, in trying to it doesn't work well in English. In Polish, you can say to mammothize an elephant, which is what he's trying to get a mammoth on the basis of an elephant, and he's thinking about producing artificial wombs. Whether he will be able to or not, and what kind of effect that would have on the humans, I have no idea. And the second one is a total dystopia. It's a movie from about, I guess, 20 years ago, in which everyone has been genetically modified, and the people who were not genetically modified are discriminated against. So we have this, that being unmodified is a bad thing. And the people who have been modified are called valid, and the people who have not been modified are called invalid. If you have not seen the movie, I recommend it highly, though all the methods that are used are extremely old-fashioned and not used anymore. The hero carries with him blood, urine, and hair. No one thought there were mouth swabs and things like that. And perhaps one of my favorite movie scenes is when the heroine gets the hero's hair, gives it to a sequencing thing. She comes, if any of you have sequenced, the old sequences were not of machines. You would get a big plate with bands on it. She looks at the plate with bands, which maybe has half of a gene, and says, approvingly. So anyway, so what I was trying to say is that for me, the extremely large interest in germline modification is probably too big, because it will be individual cases. And also, very seriously, clinics like the 2 that I showed you, if anyone is interested, they'll set it up. Whether it will work or not, I have no idea, but I'm sure that if there are parents who are interested, someone will give them that service, with possibly very bad outcomes. But the question of acceptance of somatic gene therapy does not arise. The problem is only if certain people do not want to be cured or cannot afford to be cured. Well, it's double. If you cannot afford to be cured, it's a problem. If you don't want to be cured, it's a somewhat different thing. So I think I'll finish with this, as my time is sort of, well...
Your 5 minutes?
Yeah, so I finished 5 minutes early, and simply the reason for this was to make you think a little bit of what the real problems are, and to think about what happens in a world where people are genetically modified in the germline and when it becomes obligatory. I really recommend watching this movie. It's a good movie, though hopefully we will not have a future like that. I think a future like that is unlikely, because if the prices of gene therapy are unlikely to become much lower, the prices of germline therapy are extremely unlikely to become low at any point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ewa, for the wonderful presentation. Indeed, every life matters. At this point in time, let me bring Dr. Svitlana Pustovit. She is a doctor of philosophy, a professor of national health care at the University of Kiev, that's in Ukraine, president of the Ukrainian Association on Bioethics, and member of the Ethical Committee of National Science Academy of Ukraine. In a special way, we would really like to thank you for making it to this conference. You are coming from a very difficult situation, but you still valued everything and you are here with us. And her presentation this morning is on the precautionary principle and other ethical arguments on invasive genetics technologies as well as modern concepts of health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delvin, for such presentation. Dear colleagues, dear Marcela and Isolina, thank you for invitation. And I would like also to thank all countries and their representatives at this conference which support and help Ukrainians in Russian-Ukrainian war. But now the situation is very difficult and threatening. But I believe in our victory, and I believe that we will be able to knock down Russian orcs with your helps, with your psychological, financial, military help to knock down Russian orcs and to win. Thank you. In my presentation, I am going to discuss some philosophical aspects of gene technologies, and I have changed the topic of my presentation. And the first slide, you can see the father of bioethics, and Van Rensselaer-Potter developed the concept of global bioethics as all-embracing and comprehensive ethics aimed at the acceptable survival of humanity. He pointed out that it should be combined two kinds of ethics: medical and ecological ethics, ethical issues of health care, and the preservation of the natural environment. And he thinks that people should not only recognize the danger of global ecological catastrophe and overpopulation, but they should also make commitments in terms of changing lifestyles, the way of thinking, improving the quality of health and education, and so on. When we talk about invasive biomedical technologies, we mean risks, and we deal with the risk society. Ulrich Beck, a German philosopher, showed that such a society is characterized by pluralization of risks, systemic risks, lack of personal responsibility, presumption of scientific progress, fait accompli policy, and technologization of risks, social boomerang effect of risks. Scientists in the risk society have a monopoly to rationality and trust. Unfortunately, scientists cannot investigate future risks of technologies, but use such arguments in public debates. Thomas Kuhn, American philosophy of science, proposed paradigm conception of science development. There are four important components of the paradigm: mythological and symbolic part, a metaphysical part, values, moods, models of problem solutions. And we can consider CRISPR gene editing as a kind of scientific paradigm with four components: mythological and symbolic part. Genome defect is an evil that threatens humanity. The second part, metaphysical part, association of diseases with certain genome defect. The third part, values, its values of science, of molecular biology. And the third, solution model, genetic engineering. The Human Genome Project laid the foundations for a new science, genomics, which focuses exclusively on the study of the genome. With the advent of sequencing technology, it has become clear how complex, for example, cancer really is. Some cancers involve up 120 genetic mutations, while other forms of cancer are accompanied only 2 or 3. Some of the newly discovered cancer mutations have come as a complete surprise. In fact, genes do not directly control the tumor. They affect the metabolism of nutrition or modify the chemical structure of DNA. What about science? In fact, science created a completely new situation. It changed the way people relations to themselves, to illness, suffering and death. Diseases began to appear as a scientific concept, became the result of diagnostic progress. The normostatistic physiological norm became the basis of our ideals about health. Genetic engineering, genetic technologies are based on modern scientific concept of normal or abnormal defective genome, but we don't know why nature came up with these defective genes and diseases. Medicine only explains, science only explains regulations and cause-effect relationship. And then we need to use biology to explain the origin of genes defects. But biology has no medical concept of disease and health. Siddhartha Mukherjee, American medical scientist, showed that since medicine cannot encompass the integrity of life, it does not include the irrational emotions, feelings, rational things, emotions, feelings, narratives, the daily life of the patients, existential dimensions. It cannot claim to discover fundamental laws of life, but only regularities. The science formulates 3 paradoxical laws of medicine. Deep intuition is much more powerful than highly conducted analysis. Norms teach us rules and exceptions teach us laws. For every perfect medical experiment, there is a perfect human error. At this conference, speakers are discussed gene editing and what does mean such technology, treatment or enhancement. I agree that today it must be treatment and therapy. Georges Canguilhem, French philosopher and physician, showed that the norm in medicine is not external, it is produced by the life process itself. There is no science of normal. There is a science of situations and conditions that are called normal. This science is physiology. Physiology is a science of stable moods of life, but only clinical practice gives significance to the concept of pathology. Life itself introduces the categories of life and health interpersonal consciousness. Medicine can exist only because people feel sick, so not enhancement but treatment. In classical rationality, we understand existential norm as self-control, balance, internal non-conflict. But in existential philosophy and in phenomenology, the philosophies of 20th century, there are different point of view to norm. For example, existential philosophy proposed personally oriented personally oriented term like self-contradiction, discontinuity, internal struggle, ambivalence of good and evil in the soul. The phenomenological approach suggests consider our consciousness as a thing that affects us every day in a new way and creates new pictures of the world and new meanings. We deal with medicine and molecular biology, which try to pay attention only to statistical data and significance. It's 94 or 98%, but what about 2 and 5%? We deal with rationality restrictions, so it's the same with vaccination. What about 3 and 5% of vaccinated people, side effect, disease, death, and so on? It's regularity of science. It's like not no law, but regularities. And we have different approaches to understanding of norm. For example, not all as this slide, but for example, communicative model, scientific model, biological model, psychoanalytic model, and not only scientific, rational, mathematic nature model, rational model, but different approaches to understanding. And we also have a different understanding of health and disease. For example, a traditional naturalistic understanding and normativistic or holistic, when we understand that health we need to discuss in a social and cultural context, and this term related to human values and ideals, but not the same in naturalistic point of view. And we deal with many models of health, beginning from naturalistic and ending hybrid or holistic models of life. And of course we discuss bioethical model of health. If we deal with choice, personal choice, with authority and dignity of person, and to choose technology or not to choose, bioethical model of health based on ideas about individual health as a well-being, in the achievement of which values and ethical principles play a major role. And in bioethical model we can discuss different ethical principles as precautionary principle, autonomy, dignity, integrity, solidarity, principle of justice and do not harm, beneficence, and so on. So we have some situation when one speaker said at this conference that it's not bad to have a quickly result of clinical trial of vaccination, not at 10 years, but 3 or 4 years. Quick result, it's good, but it's trend of scientific innovation. But in the same presentation, colleagues have meant Kantian statement about value of person. According to Kantian deontology, Kantian ethics, no one person can be a tool, but only the aim of any human activity. And genetic engineering can modify human genome at the embryo stage with the aim of enhancement, and we can in such a way destroy anthropological and philosophical foundation and conception. For example, Hobbes' theory of natural rights on man, or theory of justice of John Rawls. All human beings have equal rights because they are born in the same way, because they are born naturally, in natural way. So it's danger to change our anthropological and philosophical foundation, and what will be our future. So there are some philosophical aspects and issues which need to reflect, to discuss. And this slide, it's example of the first person to die in gene therapy clinical trial. It's presents this slide that it's we should be very careful when we use such new technologies which have experimental character, which are clinical trials, not medical practice, not traditional medical practice. So I need to, I need to do a conclusion of my presentation. The first one is natural science and biotechnology have their restrictions because of their rational and mathematical nature. The second, modern biotechnology, including CRISP and other gene technologies, are characterized by very aggressive, invasive character. If nature does not voluntarily reveal its secrets, it must be part of the test. It must be, we need invasive and to know these secrets. It's aggressive practice. CRISP technology is experimental and it is clinical trials, so it's not safe and must be taken into account. This situation, and we need to follow autonomy and dignity of person, respect of autonomy and dignity, and maybe all bioethical principle. Justice is social contract. The fourth, consensus. Justice is social contract consensus of civil democratic society. So, as a philosopher, I do not think that equality is the one criteria of justice. It's necessary to go out of scientific definition of health and diseases to more holistic and integral understanding. We are already in the middle of technology. It is an extension of ourselves. So it's very difficult to separate ourselves from technology. As said Heidegger, for example, German philosopher, It's necessary and actual. I am agree with Porter and with Amos Shapiro to reflect, to discuss, to make interdisciplinary groups, representatives, natural and humanitarian sciences, and to find solution enough complicated for enough complicated problems. And I have some minutes to finish Porter words. A humility in which we admit that not one of us knows how society proceeds. What does mean humility by Porter? A humility that causes us to listen in order to utilize the thoughts of others. A humility that is not a mask for incompetence, but rather that is willing to lay measure of competence on the line, to step over the disciplinary boundary. A humility means to criticize and to be criticized, to modify a cherished personal insight through the operation of an interdisciplinary group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Svitlana Pustovit. We are very good with time.